The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Welcome to this episode of Diversity Connections Faith Edition. Thank you for joining us. We're discussing the topic wealth and compassion from our various faith traditions. And I'd like to frame a few questions for conversants to respond to as we engage in our conversation this evening. What is your attitude towards wealth? Do you see it as essentially good or evil? Or does it depend on how it is attained or used? Do the wealthy have any expectations concerning how they use their wealth? So, let's go ahead with the conversation.
Okay, well, I can start off. From the Buddhist perspective, wealth is not evil or bad. And this goes all the way back to Shakyamuni. He went through a time of his own awakening where he tried ascetic practices and decided they really didn't have value in and of themselves. The wealth really depends on the motivation for attaining it, how it's attained, and then what you do with it. And there are different types of wealth. In Buddhism, we talk about treasures of the body, treasures of the storehouse, treasures of the heart. Treasures of the heart are the most important. They have nothing to do with money.
Yes.
And those are the ones that are the most important.
That's considered wealth, though, because we often think of wealth in terms of money, either that we carry in our pockets or money implied on our credit cards or in mythical money in bank accounts and other accounts.
Absolutely. And, for this, I think, most of us, when we think of wealth, we're talking about money. And, of course, that involves economies. And from the Buddhist perspective, it's really not just about us. If we're only focusing on our own needs, our own desires, greed, then we're not really living as Buddhists. We need to be thinking about what overcoming other people's suffering and bringing them happiness. And if we do that, and if whatever we're doing, we're really keeping that in mind, then we can be using our desire for attaining things to benefit other people.
Okay. Let's continue.
In the Christian faith, I hear a lot of similarities. And money itself, wealth itself, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, because in the Old Testament, ones like Abraham and Job and Solomon had extreme wealth, probably more than we could even imagine. But I think the key is there, number one, how you attain it. There's always a prohibition on what the scriptures call filthy lucre or illegal gain. And also there's a prohibition if you simply hoard it for yourself. And I think one of the key passages in the Bible is in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 2, it says it's required of stewards that we be found faithful. And in the Psalms it says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So we believe that everything we have belongs to God. Everything was created by Him. We are simply stewards or managers of it. And what happens is that puts a greater responsibility upon us, because we have to think about what we're doing. I get frustrated when people don't think about, we just do this. No, you need to think about it, make decisions, you need to have convictions, and use it to the best of your ability.
Okay. Jim, I see you nodding. How do you relate to that?
It is very similar to what's been said. Financial wealth in and of itself is essentially irrelevant. Whether you have it or you don't, as a spiritual being on this plane of existence, this is a beginning. So when you think of eternity, this is the blink of an eye. And so what financial wealth may be good for you, may be good at this point in your existence, but it's irrelevant, really, when it comes down to it. And again, with wealth is responsibility. Financial wealth is a good thing if it's used properly. And it's at some point, wealth becomes a liability if you don't, because it becomes a personal liability because that's what you're trying to preserve and multiply, and you forget about everything else. It becomes a spiritual liability because you're not sharing that wealth. You're not taking care of God's creatures. It becomes a social liability, hoarding wealth, because wealth is needed for education. Wealth is needed for medical care. Wealth is needed for housing. And how that comes about and gets distributed is a whole other thing. But wealth can be a good thing. It can be a liability, but it's irrelevant.
It sounds like a commentary on what's happening right now. When the wealth gets blocked, then it becomes a bad thing. When it flows freely, then it's something that becomes useful for everyone. Nicoma, let's hear from your perspective.
Well, it would be wonderful if today's society lived up to what these gentlemen have been talking about. One of the big conflicts that traditional Native Americans have is our contrast in dealing with material things. In our traditional way, the richest person in town was the poorest person in town, because he or she gave things away. They shared everything that they had, and they may have nothing of material value whatsoever on a regular basis, because they've shared everything. And they're the most respected person in the tribe, in the village. And so not that we don't respect and appreciate and hold on tight to special possessions. Like if somebody gifts us in the old days a shield or a bow and arrow set or a knife or a robe, a buffalo robe or something, certainly these are special possessions, and we don't give that away because it was gifted to us, and we usually exchange a gift. If somebody gifts me something at a powwow nowadays, I usually give something in return, something from the heart, maybe something I created, as they did. At our events every season, we have almost every powwow, no matter where you go in the nation today, has what we call a giveaway. And a family saves up all year. They create things, they buy things, and they keep saving all these things only to give it away at an honoring at a powwow. And they would spread everything out on a blanket at a powwow. You'll see this at every powwow every weekend. Spread a big blanket out, lay everything out that they gathered throughout the year, and then they invite special honored people to come up and select an item. And then the different people, the committee that runs the powwow, and then the dancers and the singers and any speakers and so on, and eventually the general public there, non-native, come out and select something, and you all line up in a big circle, and once you take your gift, you shake hands with everybody around that circle, and then you get on the tail, and then the next one. Then a special song is sung, and everybody dances in a circle, and when the emphasis beats come on the drum, everybody holds up their gift. And that's called a giveaway. Some of the tribes have what they call potlatch. And, this is where almost all your possessions are given away. So traditionally, I'm not saying that applies to all Native Americans, because most of us fall into the same societal things nowadays that's keeping up with the Joneses and so on. But traditionally, and you'll see that at every powwow, giving things away, sharing things. That's a high priority value in our culture.
Well, we've been talking about the fact that for the most part we've experienced wealth as being relatively neutral. And it becomes a problem for other reasons, mainly attitudinal, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, in the culture in which we're living now, North America, having a lot of wealth is viewed as being good. Not having wealth, being poor, is viewed as being bad somehow or other. So where does this fit in? How do we deal with that?
Well, actually, I wanted to come in from a little bit different angle, maybe. Getting back to something you said before about, in society we all kind of agree, wealth is relatively neutral. It's how you use it. But we live in a capitalist society. What Nakoma really outlined is a perfect socialist society, where everything is really kind of communal property. In our society today, we see that as being somehow wrong. I don't know exactly why that's been so demonized, but it is. And there are some people in our society who say that that's the only way to go. And it's been exampled in history that it does work well. Buddhism doesn't say either one is right or wrong. Either one can work. It depends on what people are doing within them. There's an economist from MIT, Lester Thoreau. In fact, I think he comments on Nightly Business Report on public television quite often. He stated that what we really need to think of as a society is moving from a society of consumption to a society of construction. And some of our Buddhist leaders have talked about this in exactly the same terms. And instead of looking at satisfying our own desires and acquiring, when we build or create or build a business or whatever, we're looking at creating something of lasting value that benefits society as a whole. And there are things in Buddhism called three poisons: greed, anger, and foolishness or stupidity. These can be transformed. Greed can be transformed in a strong desire to help other people. Anger can be a strong motivation to correct injustice. And the foolishness or stupidity can actually be an impetus to move, to get off the dime and do something about it. As a society, we need to think about, rather than building things to use up just to satisfy an immediate desire, to build things of lasting value. I thought up a little scenario just to illustrate this idea from antiquity, and I kind of made it up on my own. It's not real. It's not meant to disparage anybody, but let's say there's a pope in Rome and he's building this chapel like the Sistine. The designer comes in and says, okay, it's a time to decide on the ceiling. You got a bright white, you got an off-white, you got a beige. And they got this guy who want to paint a picture. Now, he's really expensive. Well, the Pope chose Michelangelo to do this. Not because it was the most economical, not because it was going to make the church wealthy, but it ended up inspiring hundreds, millions of people for generations. Lasting value. When we create anything in society, whether it's a kitchen or a chapel or whatever, if we're thinking about lasting value for humanity, and that goes for putting the money into education or people just being able to live longer and better, these are lasting values. And it really comes down to an issue of values, human values.
Okay, how we value.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Mel, and I guess I come back to the balance of it, because Paul said to the church in Thessalonica, if a man doesn't work, then he shouldn't eat. And some people are going to earn more than others. We all know that.
Oh, absolutely.
Some people are going to be more successful. And on one hand, yes, there's a lot of emphasis in the Scripture for Christians to give, to be stewards, as I said before, but not to take away. I love Tacoma's illustration there, and I don't think that was I think that is a nice way of giving and expressing without taking away that desire to work. Because you and I know that if somebody's just given something, and we go through this at Christian churches, we have people coming asking for things all the time, and I tell people that if we gave away everything that people ask for, we could sometimes give away over $1,000 a week, but it doesn't do them any good.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult because you have to Some people are truly needy. Some people are down on their luck. Some people truly need assistance. And one thing, and I can't speak for all Christian denominations, but we do have a type of benevolence, and it's usually decided church by church within your church. And when you do it within your church, that's the one that is commanded. And then you do know where it's going, and you do have a confidence level of where you're giving and who you're helping and how much. And we do that in our church on a regular basis. Matter of fact, there's one Scripture also teaches to visit the fatherless and the widows. These are true needy people. There was no Social Security 2,000 years ago.
Oh, right.
There was no welfare. There was no society aid help. And it was left up to the church, and largely the church probably needs to take a bigger role than it does. And I think the church has kind of given over some of that role. But boy, is it a difficult balance to get it the right way. And then the Scriptures don't say anything about outside the church, to the world in general. So what do you do then? Then it's up to individual believers, and it's up to individual churches have to think through the process and say, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with everything you say there. And I did not mean to imply that we give away things at all. In fact,
I understood that completely.
Yeah, because you're right. If you just give away charity, people don't have a chance to develop. You're actually taking away an opportunity for them to change, their own karma. And I don't want to say suffering is good, but we all are going to have suffering of some kind. It's a fact of life. It's how we deal with that and transform it that's important.
Sometimes these poor countries, what David brought up, these third world countries that in our eyes have nothing, they don't realize they're poor. There's probably a lot of American families. We didn't realize we were poor. Our family was poor growing up. We didn't know it. We thought we were doing just fine.
Go ahead.
I lived with an Amazon tribe for almost 2.5 years, long time ago. Anybody coming from the outside would say, "My word, how poor these people are." And like you say, they didn't think they were poor. They still hunted and fished with bow and arrow. Their clothes were tattered, even though they made beautiful tapestries out of their own cotton and looms. But they scrounged every day. They farmed what they called chacos, their gardens, sometimes many miles away from the village. Every family had a chaco, and to grow their crops, and then they'd hunt and they'd fish, and this is how this is their subsistence. And I lived as they did for 2 years. Just the same. I ate the same food and did what they did, and hunted and fished with them and everything. Wonderful, wonderful people. But anybody coming from the outside would say, "Oh my goodness, how poor." But don't change them. I mean, you can improve their health. You might even have a little school there, whatever the needs are for survival. But, they don't want to change.
They have treasures of the heart.
Yeah, they're happy.
So wealth is more than money, more than accumulation of material. Is that right?
Yes. well, wealth is spiritual knowledge.
Okay.
Wealth is sharing what you have.
Yeah, I think Nakoma brought that out very clearly.
Friendship.
Yeah.
Friendship.
Tremendous
Indeed.
wealth.
Wealth is in wisdom too, and our native peoples respect the leaders and the orators who share their not just their knowledge, but their experienced wisdom, and that's very highly respected.
There's a country, Bhutan, survives almost completely on foreign aid from India. One of the poorest countries in the world. They actually have a department of economy based on happiness. They actually measure everybody's happiness.
Department of Happiness.
Yes, and it's extraordinarily high. People there are very happy, and their economy centers around I'm not sure exactly how this worked. I haven't been able to research the whole thing. But I just thought that idea was revolutionary. that instead of having the government focusing on people's wealth, we're focusing on people's happiness, putting the money or whatever resources they have toward things that will really improve people's happiness, not necessarily their sense of accumulation.
Well, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread."
Yeah.
Good enough.
He didn't say anything for 6 months down the road. If we have it today, that's what we need. That's what we need today.
Well, yeah, today is essentially all we ever have.
I like that idea of Department of Happiness. That'd be interesting.
That would be very interesting indeed, yes. I'd like to see that. I've heard a lot of people, having worked with older people for a considerable period of my lifetime, say, we were poor and we didn't know it. You may have heard people say something like that too. We were poor and we didn't know it. Now, there are people, of course, who are poor and know it because somehow or other it's brought to their attention that they are poor and that they feel somehow inferior because of that poverty, however that poverty is defined. But again, the issue is not how much we have, but our attitude to what we have. And I think one of the things we've been saying here is the sharing and the willingness to share with others in the community. Like you were saying, giving away makes one especially rich in your tradition. Managing well what we have. Managing doesn't mean holding on to it, but means using for the benefit of the community.
And it's not even so much having as just what you're doing in total. And I think that, if we come down to a basic human respect level, we're really looking at each other not by what we're wearing, not by where we work or what we're doing for a living, but first and foremost as a human being. As Buddhists, we believe everybody has an essential Buddha nature and it's all the same one. There's no separation or difference between us. So I look at somebody, whether they're rich or poor, what I should be thinking is, that's a human being, has the same feelings, needs, desires that I do, essentially, and is worthy of the utmost respect. When we start with that level, the rest of this takes on kind of a different tone. It's not a matter of competition, but cooperation. It's not a matter of I'm going to give you something, so we're going to work together. You may not have much, I may have a lot, but we're both going to work toward the same goal. And I had an experience where I worked with some unemployed people off the south side of Chicago. We were building a community center. I was taking a month off from work, and we were all working doing the same stuff. And actually, I was a low man on the totem pole because I was the only white guy there. It was a very interesting experience, very eye-opening. And you begin to learn that, we really are. We aren't got down to nitty-gritty. We're all doing exactly the same thing. We're all feeling the same thing. We're all human beings. Right. And even when our beliefs differ, this group that we have kind of developed ad hoc, we're developing friendships here that even though we have very different beliefs, we're working in the same direction. Right. That's a treasure. Exactly. That's a tremendous amount of wealth.
Well, we live in very anxiety-ridden times right now because people feel threatened because their wealth is being threatened. How would you respond from your tradition to people that are in a situation like that?
Well, I find two places in Scripture. In the book of Job, Job was an extremely wealthy man, one of the first men to ever live, and he had it all, and then he lost it all. Then he gained it all back multiple times over. And he says, "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And then in the New Testament, Paul says, "I know how to abound or have much. I know how to be abased and have little." And I think if we can reach the place that those two men in their spiritual lives reached, I think that will be where it'll be a good balance for us.
Okay.
one of the things that Baha'u'llah says is very similar. He says that to be thankful in adversity and generous in prosperity.
Yes.
Good words.
Yes.
Well, what makes a person is what's in their heart and how they treat, of course, themselves, but treat others. That's very high value within Native American culture. And it doesn't matter what kind of house you live in, what kind of car you drive, how you look dressed. It doesn't matter any of those material things. It doesn't matter what your job is. That doesn't make you who you are. It's what's in your heart and how you treat others. That's what's important.
So our true wealth is within ourselves and the way we relate to others.
It should be.
It should be. Indeed, it should be. Well, that's what we're trying to get to, isn't it? Finding the true wealth that life has for us. Thank you for joining us for our conversation this evening. To get more information, log on to ksmq.org and click on Diversity Connections. While you are there, you can see highlights from favorite episodes, read the blogs, and submit your own experiences and ideas. Thanks for watching. Join us next time as we discuss diversity in our communities, where we all can make a difference.